Hi, I'm Tony Northrup, and this is our free tutorial for the Nikon Z6 and Z7 cameras. If you have a different camera, we have tutorials for just about everything at sdp.io/tutorials, so check it out there. You might also be able to find a follow-up tutorial for this camera because Nikon is planning to release an exciting new firmware update that will require us to sort of update it. Subscribe to this channel. We have lots of gear reviews, photography tutorials, and podcasts, other interesting things, so lots of free content to come back from us. Let's get started. This is more of an advanced tutorial. I'm assuming this is not your first camera. You probably have experience with previous Nikon cameras. Throughout this tutorial, I'm also going to be making specific references for those of you migrating from DSLRs, like a Nikon D750 or D850, over to these Nikon mirrorless cameras, because it's a bit of an adjustment. There are lots of advantages and some disadvantages too, and you can get everything done for the most part, but you have to learn to do things a little bit differently. So we've been working with these things for a couple of months. We figured that out, and I'm gonna try to give you a quick shortcut through it all. First of all, you can use your old Nikon batteries from like your D750 or D850 in this. It still takes the old ENEL15A batteries. However, if you want to USB charge this camera, you need to use the newer ENEL15B batteries. This is a problem for us because we have old DSLRs and we tend to swap the batteries out all the time, and then I go travel and I want to USB charge it and it won't USB charge. So just keep that in mind. If you want to USB charge it, which is great, because when you travel, you don't have to carry a battery charger with you. It's just one less thing to pack. You can see that there is a USB-C port right here. It's USB-C. So if you have a MacBook, it's going to be the same thing. If you have most new Android phones use USB-C. If not, you can use pretty much any old USB charger and get a USB-C cable for it. And then you can travel a little bit lighter. You can charge it in your bag with a USB battery pack, that kind of thing. We do it a lot. This camera takes XQD cards, which are a little unusual. If you have a D850, you probably already have one of these, but this is what they look like. It is not an SD card. The XQD cards are a little bit more expensive, they're a little bit bulkier, but they're also sturdier, and maybe most importantly, they're faster. You can pick up an XQD card at this link here. You'll see we use Amazon affiliate links to sort of point you in the right direction. And if you have the Nikon Z7, it's a 45 megapixel camera. You should get the biggest XQD card you can. 128 gigs is not too big. We will often use 256 gig XQD cards because, especially if you're a serious photographer, you can fill it up pretty fast, and then when you run out of space, that can be a real problem. If you got the Nikon Z6, it's only 24 megapixels, and you're probably gonna be okay with a 64 gig card. If you're only shooting JPEG, you can even go smaller than that. I would recommend buying at least one extra card. I mean, XQD cards are so expensive that it's hard for me to tell you to go buy 10 like I normally would with SD cards, but get an extra card and keep it in the bag that you travel with, keep it in the glove compartment of your car, even if it's a very small and inexpensive card, because at some point you're gonna leave the house and forget your XQD card, or you're gonna fill it up and you're gonna need an extra one, and it will save your butt. This tweet here is just a message from somebody who did not follow my advice and took a trip to take pictures and then was caught without a memory card. I want you to avoid that. You can pop out the memory card and put it into an XQD card reader and hook it up into your computer if you're importing your pictures. You could also use a USB adapter and get it into your smartphone or tablet and import it into an app like Lightroom Mobile. So that's possible. Another way to do it, and the way that I really prefer with these new cameras, is to use a USB-C cable and just connect it in directly through the USB-C port on the side here. So either way, memory card reader or direct connection, it should be okay. I like using the USB-C cable when I travel, so I don't have to travel with a USB card reader. As I mentioned, Nikon is already planning a firmware update to this camera that will add the eye detect autofocus that is not currently available. We're excited for this. So whenever this is, unless this video is brand new, go to Nikon's website and look for firmware updates for your camera and be sure to install them. They will add new features and fix any problems that they discover. Let's quickly cover the ports that are on the left side of this camera. You'll see that there are two rubber flaps. This one here is for video work. The top port here is for your headphones, and the bottom is for hooking up an external mic. If you plan to record audio with decent sound, you'll definitely want to hook up an external mic. And this second panel here, we can see the icons. The top port is USB-C. The second port, we have a mini HDMI port, not standard HDMI, not micro HDMI, mini HDMI. And then at the bottom, we have a port for the remote shutter trigger. You probably won't need to buy one of those because it has a built-in intervalometer and a built-in delay, so it's not that important. Let's talk a little bit about adapting lenses. I know a lot of y'all are going to be doing that. If you have Nikon DSLR lenses, you can use the Nikon adapter here. Because the Nikon Z mount is bigger, the big end goes onto the camera itself, and then you mount your DSLR lens here. You'll notice your DSLRs are fatter, right? That's why this is fat. It's making up for what we call the flange distance, which is the distance between the lens and the sensor. It has to be bigger on DSLRs because they have a big mirror there. This does not have a mirror, which is why this space here is so much narrower than it is on the SLRs. To attach the adapter, put the fat end of the adapter towards the camera body. You will get this wrong if you're like me, and then twist it to lock it on, and then you can put your DSLR lenses right there. The DSLR lenses work almost as good as the native mirrorless lenses, but not quite as good. I definitely feel like these lenses designed for mirrorless focus faster than the DSLR lenses do. So if you have the chance, if you have the choice to use one of the mirrorless lenses, they're also smaller and lighter. Let's talk about adapting older legacy lenses, like older manual f-mount lenses like this one here. This works great. And in fact, they work better on the mirrorless cameras than they do on the DSLRs because these mirrorless cameras have stabilized sensors that will add image stabilization to the legacy lenses. They also have focus peaking, which I'll show you how to use in just a little bit, and that will help you really nail the focus even when you're doing it manually. These cameras do not have focusing motors. The adapter does not have a focusing motor. So you will not be able to control the focusing on them. On the older lenses that would allow aperture control, it will not on this particular combination of the camera and the body. Maybe in the future, Nikon will release a new adapter that integrates a focusing motor, but at this time, you're just going to be using these totally manual, which means you're moving the aperture ring and the focusing it all manually. But that's okay. I actually really like that experience. If you're doing that, it just means that on the aperture ring here, you're going to be adjusting it. So you can see here it's at f2.8. This goes all the way through to f22. You'll adjust it on the lens, and you'll be able to see the effects of that in real time. So to demonstrate this, I've almost focused on a light in our studio, and right now the camera is at f2.8. You can see as I'm moving the focusing, it's coming into and out of focus, so that works just fine. As I adjust the aperture, watch what happens. I'm going to quickly go from f2.8 all the way to f22. You can see it briefly gets dark, but then the screen lights back up again. If you're shooting with a DSLR or an SLR and you're looking through the optical viewfinder, you are always seeing the shot wide open. You're always seeing the lens at the lowest f-stop number. It doesn't shut down until you take the picture. This will work differently. It will be shutting down as you are making the adjustment. The reason that the brightness is not changing is because the camera's auto exposure system is saying, hey, the lens is giving me less light. I need to crank up the brightness to match it. So that's why if I quickly switch from f2.8 to f22, it'll get briefly darker and then pop up because the camera's saying, it got dark, I'm going to fix it. And if I go from f22 to f2.8, bam, it's saying, oh, things got too bright, I need to fix it. I'll cover how to turn on focus peaking in just a second. One of the big things you'll notice switching from a DSLR like a D750 or D850 to one of these mirrorless cameras is how the optical viewfinder works in the DSLR versus the viewfinder here. Now in your DSLR, you have a very different experience when you hold the camera up like this and when you turn on live view and use the rear of the screen. If you're like me, you probably prefer to use the optical viewfinder on your DSLR because the focusing is much faster and the camera is generally more responsive. These Nikon cameras, the DSLRs, when you were using live view, the focusing would tend to be really, really slow, right? So it was kind of difficult and a last resort. Great news. These mirrorless cameras have a single unified experience. Interacting with the live view rear screen and the viewfinder here are exactly the same. Focusing is consistent, always exactly the same. However, when you're using that electronic viewfinder, the camera is going to behave more like your DSLRs did when you were using the rear live view screen. So it's like Nikon took the live view functionality from the D750 and D850 and put it into your viewfinder, but also they really, really improved it. So whereas the D750, their live view focusing was dodgy at best, here it's much, much better. So you have that kind of live view experience all the time. And that means you can hold the camera up to your eye and move the focusing points right to the edge of the frame. And the user interface that you see in the viewfinder is exactly the user interface that you see when you pull the camera away from your eye. So look at the way the autofocus points go right to the edge of the frame. That's so meaningful. That means with our D850 shooting portraits, if we wanted the eyes in the top third of the frame, we were always focusing on the eye and then kind of recomposing the shot. So everything was focus, recompose, the slow process. Here, I can put that focusing point exactly on the subject's eye and never have to do focus, recompose. Makes everything go much, much faster. With the optical viewfinder of a DSLR, when you hold the camera up to your eye, you see just a real view of the real world bouncing off of a mirror. If your exposure settings are screwed up and the picture is going to be wildly underexposed, it looks exactly the same as if the picture is going to be overexposed because it's just an optical viewfinder. It's not adjusting the brightness of the scene based on your exposure settings. But here, by default, if I add in exposure compensation, I'll do that now. I'll hold down this exposure compensation button and then make the scene dark. You can see it's reflected in real time on both the rear screen and the optical viewfinder. So that's going to take you some getting used to. It is different, but once you adjust to it, I think you'll find that it's better. You no longer have to shoot and then chimp. Like with the DSLR, you take a picture and then you review it to make sure your exposure settings are right. You know your exposure settings are right because you can see it in real time on the viewfinder. It also means the electronic viewfinder has features in it like a histogram or a level if you want it to. And seeing that stuff in real time is pretty incredible. You're going to be using the optical viewfinder a lot, the electronic viewfinder here, and I want to point out the diopter here. If you're a glasses wearer like myself, you can adjust the diopter to dial in your glasses prescription so you can take your glasses off. Even if you're not a glasses wearer, most people don't have perfect vision, so you can adjust this so when you do look through the viewfinder, you have perfect vision. First, this little button pops out. Now you can rotate it in order to get the sharpest possible picture. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn the camera on, pop this out so we can adjust it, and then hold it up to our eye. And now don't look at the scene through the lens, but look at the numbers at the bottom of the screen and adjust the diopter until those are as sharp as possible. It's going to be kind of a better here or better here thing, like you're at the doctor's office. And then when it's perfect, push it back in to lock it in place. If you hand the camera to somebody else, they might look through it and everything might be blurry because their vision might be different than yours. It's also possible that that diopter could get hit accidentally. So if you ever pick up the camera and everything is blurry, or if you think this camera's not focusing right, be sure you pop out that diopter, look at the numbers, and adjust it if necessary. There's an eye sensor in this camera. There was not an eye sensor in your DSLR. That means that, look, live view is on right now on the rear screen. As soon as I hold it up to my eye, live view shuts off and this turns on. Those two things are never on at the same time. This can be great. It can be a little bit of a pain too. Right at the top of the viewfinder here, you see that little black square. That is the eye sensor. So if I cover that up, the camera thinks I have my eye here. So as a result, there are lots of times when I'm working on the camera and it's just like the screen shuts off, and it can be such a pain, especially if I have a strap on it. It will just kind of cover it sometimes, or if I get just a little too close. You can manually control whether it's automatically switching or not with this button here right on the viewfinder. So it cycles between 4 different modes. Right now it's automatically switching. If I push it again, this time it is on the electronic viewfinder only. So the EVF will only come on when I hold it up to my eye. The rear screen never comes on unless I hit, no, it never comes on, period. That's great if you're in a dark auditorium and the rear screen would disturb the people around you. You can use the EVF only. You can review your pictures up here, do everything with it. Push it again and it's going to be monitor only. Push it a 4th time and it goes to prioritize viewfinder. You can see which one you're on if you're holding it up to your eye when you push this button. Prioritize viewfinder makes it mimic your DSLR, where holding it up to your eye will show you the EVF, but it will not switch to live view. But if you hit menu or something, it will use the rear screen. So viewfinder only shows your menu in the viewfinder. Prioritize viewfinder uses the viewfinder for shooting, but shows the menu on the rear screen. RAW versus JPEG, this is pretty basic. I generally recommend people shoot RAW for most situations. You can find out why at sdp.io/RAW-v-JPEG. I want to point out with these two cameras, they have some challenges when it comes to auto white balance. When Nikon made the leap from DSLRs to mirrorless cameras, they had to completely reinvent how they figured out white balance. So the white balance system, the auto white balance system, does not work the same at all. And we found it to generally be a little more problematic. Auto white balance misses a lot. And in fact, auto exposure works differently too. These have been reinvented. They both miss a lot. You need to be careful about both of those things. Shooting RAW will help you overcome those, especially when it's new. If you shoot RAW, it's a little easier to recover shots that are under or overexposed, or if you've missed white balance. You can still do it with a JPEG, but it's easier when you shoot RAW. One of the biggest benefits is you can get truly silent shooting with either of these cameras, something I really missed from DSLRs. The way you turn this on is to, let's hit the menu button here. Now I will go into the camera mode here. Note that I can use the touch screen. And then the very last item, scroll all the way down, is silent photography. So I'll touch that, come on. And then I will turn it on. And now when I take pictures, it won't make any sound. Switch this back to automatic. See, there's nothing really to demonstrate because it's not making any sound, but this is fantastic anytime if you're shooting a wedding or a golf game or anytime you don't want to disturb the people around you. It's great. However, silent shooting uses an electronic shutter instead of a mechanical shutter, and it can suffer from what's called a rolling shutter. You do not want to use silent shooting in cases where there is fast action. If you're shooting out a car window and the car is driving, if somebody is running really, really fast, it's something that is vertical like this could end up looking tilted in the direction in which it is moving. So just avoid it in those situations. Pretty much every other time, silent mode is pretty good. With mostly static subjects, silent mode can be really, really good. Another caveat, something you should avoid, is shooting with fast shutter speeds under different types of artificial light, especially LEDs. You can end up getting some banding in the picture. So be aware of that. Mechanical shutter will almost always give you better image quality, but it will be louder. Silent shooting also shoots at a slightly slower frame rate. That's something I'll show you in just a second. The Disp button, located on the switch that switches from still photography to video photography. Pressing the Disp button will change the accessory information highlighted in either the rear view screen or the EVF. You can see now it's showing me a histogram. If I push it again, I get an electronic level, good for landscapes, full screen with settings. Going back to the main view with extra information and push it again to simplify the display a little bit. You can use Disp when either shooting actively or reviewing your pictures. If I review my pictures, let's go back, oh, there's Sandy. If I push Disp now, notice nothing is happening now that I'm reviewing pictures. I like to be able to view the picture, the histogram of the picture after I take it. To change that, I'm going to hit the menu button. I'm going to go up to the top item here, this little playback there, and then playback display options, this third option there. I'll touch that. And now you can see I can scroll between all of the different options. And I like to see the RGB histogram and the shooting data. So actually it shows me the shooting data by default. So I'll just go back here, save those settings. And now if I hit play, I can hit Disp to switch between seeing the photo and the data and seeing the histograms. Useful stuff, right? Something you might not be used to, depending on the camera you had, is the ability to use touch. Touch is really useful on this camera. If you're holding it out like this, you can just touch the screen and it will focus and shoot. If you want different behavior, there's this icon over on the left side of the screen. Right now it's showing a finger that is exploding. That means touch to shoot. Touch it again, and now it's touch AF. So now I touch and it focuses wherever I happen to touch. If I want to shoot, I have to go back to the shutter. Touch it again, and now the touchscreen is just completely off and will not activate again until I actually touch that. And then it returns back to the normal mode. As I've demonstrated, you can use touchscreens to flip through the menus, but because the touchscreen is so useful, you might consider getting yourself some touchscreen sensitive gloves if you plan to be shooting in the cold or anytime you might want to wear gloves. They have gloves that have little bits of metal or fiber in the fingertips that will allow you to interact with the touchscreen. I know I would really miss it. When I'm reviewing pictures, it's super useful because I can zoom in and pan around. And what an easy way to verify sharpness throughout a frame. It's so much faster. You can also zoom all the way back and then flip through the pictures that you have really quickly. You can also squeeze in like this and kind of zoom out. You can also review pictures by zooming in or out with the buttons here, but I pretty much use the touchscreen all the time because it works really well. I'm going to take a minute and plug my stuff because I am an author too, and we create video books that teach you photography and post-processing and about how to use photo gear and how to buy photo gear. Stunning Digital Photography has 14 hours of video in it, and it's a proper book. So whichever your preferred method of learning, we have you accommodated, and it's less than 10 bucks. Well, it's $9.99. But it's the best-selling photography book in the world and has been for quite a few years. So go to Amazon, check out the reviews for Stunning Digital Photography. You can buy it at sdp.io/store or pretty much any bookstore. Also check out my books on Photoshop, Lightroom, and check out my art and science bundle here because that is really valuable information that goes too deep to really work properly on YouTube, and you can get it all at our store. We also have here a professional portrait training session if you're thinking about shooting pro portraits that gets into the business and shows you how to properly make money. Thanks for listening to my little plug. Like, that's what lets me do these hour-long tutorials for free, right? Let's talk about changing the modes on the camera. There's a big old mode dial here, and if you go to turn it, it's not going to work. There's a little button here and you have to hold it down. You hold it down to turn it. Otherwise, you're probably familiar with these modes. P, program mode, lets the camera choose both the aperture and the shutter speed. S allows you to control the shutter speed. So the way that works, let's turn this on. It's in shutter priority now. I'm going to use the rear dial now to adjust the shutter speed. You know what? I'm going to hit Disp so you can see it nice and big. I'm using the rear dial now to adjust the shutter speed to whatever I want. If I switch this over to A mode, now it's the front dial that works and adjusts the aperture. If you're coming from like a Canon camera where the same dial adjusts the shutter or aperture depending on your mode, it's different. The back dial is always the shutter, the front dial is always the aperture. If I go into M mode, that remains true. Front dial does the aperture, back dial does the shutter. And then you'll see three other modes, U1, U2, and U3. These are incredibly useful, and I will describe them a little bit later. By the way, you can check the table of contents down below and quickly jump to a part of the video that you want to see. There's also this green auto mode. And I know you're a super camera expert, but if you ever get a little freaked out, if you think something's not working right in the camera and you just want to get a quick shot, set it to the green auto mode. That's also perfect if you've highly customized your camera and you want to hand the camera to somebody else to use and make it as easy as possible. That just makes the camera try to do as many things automatically as possible. Now, usually in this tutorial, I will explain what Aperture Priority does and show you about the background blur and all that and how you take creative control of your photography. But I'm assuming this isn't your first camera. You probably have a good grasp of that. If you don't feel like you've mastered camera settings, aperture, shutter speed, or if you just want a more in-depth understanding of things like composition and storytelling and lighting, again, I'll send you back to Stunning Digital Photography, my book here, which covers all that in depth for any camera. Depth of field preview. This is one of those things that's going to be a little bit different between your DSLR and your mirrorless camera. Now, on a DSLR, if you're using the optical viewfinder and you hit that depth of field preview button, it will shut the aperture of your lens down to whatever aperture you've selected. If you're not shooting wide open, the viewfinder suddenly gets dark because it has to shut down. And that means you can't see anything, right? These mirrorless cameras work differently. By default, let's show something here. The depth of field preview is always on, but this is a little weird. I find that sometimes the depth of field preview simulates the aperture that you've selected, but not through the entire aperture range. So I'll try to demonstrate it here. Let me get, this is an f1.8 lens, so let me put this into Aperture Priority mode, and it's wide open, and I'm going to just get this a little bit out of focus. Now, as I shut the aperture down to 2, 2.8, 2.5, and I keep going and going and going, you can see that this screen got sharper and sharper and sharper. And if I open it back up, it gets blurrier and blurrier. I'm not changing the focusing point. That's just me demonstrating that the camera is physically shutting the aperture down and showing it to you in real time. That does not happen when you're using the optical viewfinder of a DSLR, but here it happens when you're using the electronic viewfinder. So that's important. You will usually see the depth of field preview in real time. But I found that there are times when I'll get to f5.6 and it will stop simulating anything beyond that. So in other words, it will be the same aperture from f5.6 to f22. There's a way to work around that. You can go into the menu here and set a custom depth of field preview button so that you can force it to work whenever you want to. To do that, I am going to go to the pencil icon here in the menu system and then go down to Controls and go to Custom Control Assignment. And now I'm going to pick whatever button I want to be the depth of field preview button. This one is good. It's where I would normally reach on an SLR. Select it and set it to preview. I've already done it on this camera. So now it's mapped to this FN1 button on the front of the camera here. And so now you can see if I go all the way to f22, nothing gets f16, nothing gets more in focus, but if I hit that depth of field preview button, bam, everything comes into focus. So to summarize, from f1.8 to f5.6, the camera is adjusting the aperture for me, but I will not see any difference going from f5.6 on. See how the screen kind of flashes with every aperture change? It stops when I start going above f5.6. I have to hold down that depth of field preview button. I'm holding it down now, and now you can see it's active throughout it. Good. Now you know exactly how much depth of field you're getting without having to guess like you used to. Let's talk about vibration reduction. This is a new feature. Nikons haven't had this before, but now the sensor is stabilized. They used to have to build stabilization into the lenses, but now every lens you use, including old legacy lenses, can be stabilized. When your hand shakes, the sensor moves in the opposite direction. So you can hand hold for much longer periods of time. It's not perfect like any image stabilization system. It can only offset a certain amount of movement. So if you move a little bit, it can compensate for that. Move as little as possible, and sometimes you can take shots that are like 5, 6, 7, 8 stops below the reciprocal rule, depending on how still you are. I will say, you probably don't want to leave it on all the time. Nikon officially recommends turning it off anytime you're on a tripod. They say it can cause problems. I have tested this and not seen any problem with it. I was very careful on the high megapixel Z7 to try it on and off on a tripod, and I saw no difference in sharpness. So you probably don't have to worry about it, but Nikon says you should. So I'm going to tell you how to turn it off. There's also different modes for shooting still subjects with stabilization and panning subjects. So it's like normal and sport mode. Let's get into the menu system here. We'll go to the camera. Let's go down to page 4, and then we'll see vibration reduction is the second option here. It's on normal by default. If you want to pan, choose sport. And if you're on a tripod or something, turn it off. If you're shooting video, you should turn it off. I know it seems like it'd be great for video, right? But at least in this incarnation with this firmware, we experience weird jiggles. And I've seen this from other people too. Nikon hasn't said they're working on it, but I do know it to be an issue. So experiment if you want, but I've definitely had weirdness caused by the vibration reduction being turned on that's fixed when I turn it off. Let's talk about reviewing photos. After you've taken some shots, you probably want to check them out and make sure that they're good. I showed you some of this earlier, so be sure to watch that. If you want to delete a photo quickly, hit the delete button and then hit it again to delete it. You can press the I button here to bring up a quick menu that will allow you to add a rating from 1 to 5 stars. If you rate it 5 stars, you import your stuff into Lightroom, you will be able to quickly find your 5-star picture. So if I have a couple of minutes of downtime in a shoot, I like to go back and review my pictures and rate the best one so I can quickly find them. It's just a faster workflow thing. That eye menu also provides options for quickly retouching the picture like you would if you wanted to process a JPEG and change the exposure or something, or protecting it. But pretty much for me, I just use the rating option. Notice the second option here is grayed out. You can select that and it'll send it to your smartphone. We'll cover that in just a little bit. Let's talk about continuous shooting. To select whether you're in single shot mode or continuous shooting mode, there's a button down here. Press that, and now I can use the back dial to switch between the different modes. These modes are pretty important, and some of them are trickier than you think. Single frame takes one picture when you push the shutter, stops taking pictures. Continuous low will shoot at 3 frames per second by default, but I can now use the front dial here to change the specific frames per second, anywhere from 1 frame per second to 5 frames per second. Scroll over to continuous high, and that's locked in at the maximum frames per second, which varies by camera. I'll show you two in a second. Go to continuous high extended, and it will shoot faster, but with some serious compromises. Continuous high extended cannot shoot 14-bit RAW, can only shoot 12-bit RAW. And if that means, if you don't know what the heck I'm talking about, you're probably okay, because 12-bit RAW is really, really good. But some people who are nitpicky about it want to always shoot 14-bit RAW. But more importantly, continuous high extended does not show you a real-time view through the viewfinder. So I'll tell you what, let's go into continuous high here. And I'm going to shoot. And if you look at the viewfinder, you can see real-time what's happening as I pan the camera around. Now, let's go into continuous high extended, and I'll repeat that process. Let's get this focused. Well, I don't know if you can tell, but it's showing you the previous picture I took and not a real-time feed through the viewfinder. That means that there's like a split second of lag in the viewfinder. If you're shooting wildlife or something, that means you're seeing like a split second behind, and it makes it almost impossible to keep up with moving subjects. Continuous high extended also locks in the focus and exposure, so it can't track moving subjects. So continuous high extended is kind of perfect for getting as many frames per possible of a still subject, like somebody who's not moving around in the frame. And that would be like somebody in baseball who's swinging a bat and you want to try to get that moment of impact. That's a perfect time to use continuous high extended, but in all other sports scenarios or action scenarios, it should be avoided. Here are the restrictions for the different movement types and the specific frame rates for both the Nikon Z6 and Z7. You'll see that silent photography is always a little bit slower than mechanical photography, and the mechanical shutter itself works a little bit faster. Shooting continuous high extended here, you'll see you cannot necessarily do 14-bit RAW and achieve the high 12 frames per second that the Nikon Z6 advertises. It drops to 9 frames per second, or you choose to use a lower bit rate. The eye menu on this camera is incredibly useful. It's a shortcut to all those many, many settings. So now I'm in a shooting mode. I'll push the eye menu, and it brings up this little short menu here that gives me just stuff I might frequently want to change, like turning on the Wi-Fi or changing the shutter mode. Now, for example, I could change the shutter speed, the shutter mode, using the eye menu. But I have a button here, so why would I need it there? No problem. I can go in and customize it and make it more useful for the way I shoot. I would suggest customizing this with the things that you use most often. So let's hit the menu button. We'll go down to the pencil icon and Controls F, and then it's F1, Customize Eye Menu. So as I select that, I can go in here, pick the mode that I want to be something different, and then let's say I want to set this to electronic front curtain shutter, whatever it is. There you go. That's where you do that custom, shoot with it some. The things you end up going in the menus for, put them on your eye menu. Let's talk about the focusing modes. On the D750, D850, what I taught everybody was you put it in continuous focus with a single focusing point or with 3D focusing, and that was it. That's just how you lived your life, no problem. It's way more complex on these mirrorless cameras. You're going to be constantly switching between single autofocus, continuous autofocus, and using different size focusing points in order to get the best results. There's no like one focusing mode that does it all anymore. So you have to be conscious of it, or else you will find yourself missing focus, or you'll find it hunting for focus. By default, this FN2 button here controls the focusing. So I'm going to be pushing this. So now I'll push that FN2 and it brings up options for focusing. Now I can quickly move the rear and front dials in order to change it. So now it's in AFC, I can switch it to, so now it's in AFS, I can switch it to AFC, continuous focusing, or manual focus. Get used to this. You're going to be doing this a lot, so it's important to know how to do that. Once I'm in AFS or AFC, I can switch between the different focusing point groups by using the front dial. So here we have single point AF, auto area AF, wide area AF, dynamic area AF. Single point AF is something you should use for precise focusing, say, on somebody's eye. But you'll find the focusing isn't nearly as fast as if you use dynamic area AF or use all autofocus points. I'll also point out, let's get into AFS here. Use AFS whenever you can. If you're not tracking a moving subject, switch back to AFS. If you are, only use AFC when you are tracking a moving subject. AFS is more accurate. If you shoot an AFC on a still subject, you'll find the focus varies a lot. If you have to do that, hold down the shutter button, let it refocus, and take multiple pictures so that you're sure that you get one right. It's not as reliable as it was on your DSLR. When you're in auto area AF, here's where you can take advantage of face detect, where it can see a face and automatically focus on it. I want to point out a difference between the Nikon Z6 or the Z7. Right now, I am holding the Z6. Which one of these is the Z7? Here's my Z7. I'm going to do the same thing. Let's get into AFS. On the Z7, there's single point AF, just like the Z6, but there's another mode, pinpoint AF. The difference here is key. Pinpoint AF is a smaller focusing point, and it's what you would need if you really needed to focus through something. If you wanted to focus on, say, the eye instead of the eyelashes, that's what you would need. But single point AF uses phase detect autofocus. It is much faster. Pinpoint AF uses contrast detect autofocus. It is slower, but more precise. If you were to try to shoot action with pinpoint AF, you'd be very unhappy. It would not work well at all because it is simply too slow. Therefore, pinpoint AF uses smaller focusing points, but it will take longer to autofocus. So you would, even a human being standing here, like shooting a portrait, you'll find that you move and they move, and pinpoint AF might not even be able to kind of keep up with that. You'll get some percentage of shots in focus, but they won't be all in focus. Most of the time, you're going to be happier with single point AF instead of pinpoint AF. Pinpoint AF is for things like macro photography. I want to point out that while the camera has a face detect mode, it's only useful for the most casual of shooting. It's not something I'd recommend for professional portraits, especially if you're using a lens with shallow depth of field, like an 85 or 105 millimeter lens, because it does not see the eyes. It will just see the whole face and focus on any part of the face, and you'll find that the eyes are out of focus and you'll be upset with your picture. So you're better off using single point AF in those cases. As I mentioned before, there's a future firmware update coming that will hopefully fix that. So head to sdp.io/tutorial to see the update when that's available. It's not available when I'm recording this. Let's talk about subject tracking. If you want to track a moving subject, you can do that. First, let's get it into auto area AF. That's the only AF mode where subject tracking works, and continuous AF, AFC. So now that it's in that mode, what I can do is activate subject tracking by clicking OK, this button here. And now I can either use the thumbstick to pick a point, or I can touch the point. And can you see the yellow box there kind of tracking the K around? That is subject tracking. This is not 3D focusing like it was on the D850. With the D850 or the D5, I would use 3D focusing to lock in on a subject, and then wherever it was, it would track it around. This only works when you're using the rear screen because you have to be able to click the OK button. So if you're shooting sports and you have it up to your eye, you really can't do it. You'd have to be holding it out here, and it's like impossible to shoot moving subjects with a telephoto lens this way. So you just aren't going to use subject tracking for those things. Like, it's just not that useful. And frankly, I haven't found scenarios where it is really useful, since you do have to kind of interact with the OK button and the screen like that. Nikon hasn't said they'll fix it, but I hope in a future firmware update, they'll just change that user interface. Focus peaking is especially useful if you're planning to manually focus lenses. So let's get this turned on. I am going to turn this into manual focus mode. There we go, manual focus. And focus peaking is off by default, so I'll go in and turn it on. It's on D10. D10, peaking highlights. Peaking level is off. I'll turn it on. And usually I will almost always use high sensitivity. Now I'm going to pick my peaking highlight color. You can pick these colors. Just pick a color that's not in the scene you're photographing. If you're photographing somebody in a red dress, don't pick red. Pick yellow or blue or white. So red is fine for me for this scenario. So let's get in here and let's look at the screen. Now, I'm in manual focus mode. So as I focus and I get close, you will start to see red lines appearing around the words. There we go. So now I can see exactly where I'm currently focused, and as I rack focus in and out, you can see it's kind of tracking it. This works great with legacy manual focus lenses and really makes focusing with them a pleasure. Focus peaking is not perfect. It is close, but it's not perfect. If you want to be perfect, you really have to zoom in. So if you are using focus peaking, it's kind of impractical to like zoom in and try to nail focus on most things. But what I'll usually do is use focus peaking to get my focus close. I'll set the shutter to continuous, and then I'll kind of hold my body and lean in and out a little bit, and then it'll be like click, 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 while I'm leaning in and out, so that one of those shots is bound to have nailed focus. Let's talk about ISO and configuring ISO on the camera. ISO is basically the sensitivity of the sensor. High ISOs are good for low light. Low ISOs are good for bright light. The way I shoot, I'm almost always on auto ISO. I just let the camera take care of it, and that works fine for me. If you want to change the ISO button's right here next to the shutter. Just hold it down, and now you can use the back dial to manually set the ISO. But notice, see how it says ISO auto there? That means that whatever I dial in, the camera's going to ignore. It's going to just pick its own ISO. So if I want to change the ISO to manual, I'll move the front main dial here. So holding on the ISO button, I'll flip that to not auto. So you can see I'm switching between auto and not auto by moving the main dial. To explain what the low option is here, the base ISO on the Z6 is 100, the base ISO on the Z7 is 64. You will get the best image quality at those ISOs. However, you can actually get a little bit less noise if you go to one of the low options. Low 1.0 is one stop below the base ISO. So half of 100 is 50, so low 1.0 is ISO 50. I don't know why they don't write ISO 50, but they're just trying to tell you that it's clipping a little bit of highlight detail. I have never noticed a difference, only if you wanted to recover highlights. If I go really high up on the scale here, whoo, look at that, ISO 51,000. Now if I go past that, it's showing high. High 1.0 is ISO 120,000 on this camera, double 51,000, 102,000. And high 2 is 2 stops above, or 4 times that max ISO of 51,000. But like I said, I pretty much just leave it on auto ISO all the time. If you're the type who's particular about the auto ISO that it selects, go into the menu system, select the camera, and then the last option on the first page is ISO sensitivity settings. Here you can set the maximum ISO that it will go to, or even set a minimum shutter speed. This allows, if you're shooting wildlife photography or sports and you want to use auto ISO and you want to use an auto shutter speed, but you don't ever want it to fall below 1/1600th of a second, you could select that there. But for the most part, you should just leave that on auto, or it's going to be a little bit weird. You can see you can also kind of tweak it to be faster or slower, but generally the default is going to be just fine. Back button focus. If you love back button focus, I'm going to show you how to do it. If you don't love back button focus, you will. If you watch this video at sdp.io/bbf, I'll show you how to use it. Hit the menu button, go to the pencil icon, go to autofocus, and then go to A7, AF activation. By default, it's at shutter/AF on. That means the camera will autofocus when either you press this AF on button here, or you have to press the shutter button. If you want to use back button focus, you want the autofocus to be activated with AF on, but not with the shutter button. Just hit AF on only, and now it prompts you to choose out of focus release. Like, will the camera take a picture if it has not acquired focus? You You can shoot without autofocus release. If you enable autofocus release, the camera will take pictures faster, but they might be out of focus. So usually I'll set it to disable, but that might mean that the camera's like hunting and it's not taking pictures when you want it to. And the focusing systems here are a little bit slower than you might be used to on your Nikon DSLRs. Let's talk about bulb and time modes. If you're, say, shooting stars or you want to get a 2-minute exposure, you can do that. It's really easy. Put your camera into manual mode. Set the aperture to whatever you want it with the front dial. And then with the back dial, scroll to the left until you can go to 30 seconds. And then if you do another tick, it goes to bulb. In bulb mode, the shutter stays open as long as you hold the shutter button down. You probably don't want to stand there with your finger on it for more than 30 seconds. You'd shake the camera and get bored. So the only reason you'd ever do this is if you had an external shutter release. However, you don't ever need to buy one of those because you should be using time mode. I find it more useful. So forget bulb mode. Let's scroll the shutter, the back dial one more time until we get to time mode. And now when I push the shutter button once, the shutter opens. And when I push it again, it releases. And thereby creating as long as an exposure as you wait before pushing it again. So you can push it once, wait 2 minutes, push it again, and you've made yourself a 2-minute exposure. That picture I took is wildly overexposed because it was longer than it should be for this amount of brightness. One more plug for my books. Stunning Digital Photography has over 14 hours of video built into it. It's the best way to learn photography, and if you don't like it, I will just give you your money back. It doesn't happen much. Check the reviews on Amazon. People really love the book. You're gonna have to organize your photos, and Adobe Lightroom is the way we do it. If you want to get into Adobe Lightroom, we have a video book on that, 14 hours of video. We also have a book on Photoshop, which will take your photography to the next level. You can also check out The Art and Science of Photography, which is filled with 10 hours of video training that is too deep for Amazon. It's stuff that is people wouldn't click on, but people need to know. And as with everything we do, it's all a money-back guarantee. So you can pick it up at our store at sdp.io/store, or just search for my name, Tony Northrup, at Amazon. Okay, let's talk about video. It's pretty straightforward. If you want to switch to video mode, the dial is back here. Flip it into video. And now it's pretty much ready to record video. I can touch the screen and it will focus on that. I can push the FN2 and it's gonna let me switch between the different focusing modes just like it did for still photography. It's all pretty intuitive, but there are some caveats to it. The first thing I would suggest is to avoid auto white balance. Now, I warned you about using auto white balance for stills, but with stills it's kind of easier to fix because you can shoot raw. With video, you might want to just really double check your auto white balance. And I especially want to say it's often important to switch the white balance between two different modes that they have. So I've hit the I here. The option in the lower left corner here is white balance. You can see by default it's set to auto. There's another option that is natural light auto. You might not have seen that option before. Auto should be used if you might be indoors or outdoors. It's the best option for if you aren't putting any thought into white balance. But if you know you're shooting outdoors and you still want to use auto white balance because the sun's going to move behind the clouds or whatever, switch to natural light auto and the white balance becomes much more accurate for those outdoor shots. But really, if you're shooting video, take the time to manually set the white balance to the option that is most accurate for you, because the white balance can be so far off that it's very difficult to fix in post. I want to mention that these cameras have different image qualities when you're shooting full width. By default, they will shoot in what's called FX mode, using the entire width of the sensor. That provides you with the best image quality on the Nikon Z6. If you're shooting with a Nikon Z7, you'll get better image quality by switching to DX mode, which gives you a 1.5 times crop. So I'll show you how to do that now. First, I'll put this into movie mode. And kind of like, as we look at the frame here, you can see those words show up. When we come back, it'll be different. So I'll hit the menu button here. I'll go to the movie icon and then I will choose image area, this third option. And I will set this to DX. And so now as I get back to the main screen, you can see it's now much tighter. A shortcut to this is to hit the I button and then go to this third option on the top row here. And now you can quickly switch between DX and FX. This also gives you a free crop. So if the lens you have on isn't quite tight enough, you can quickly jump in here. It's exactly like using an APS-C camera. And if you aren't sure the implications on things like sensitivity and depth of field, you can go to sdp.io/crop where we've set up some material around that. But basically it just crops the image in. Microphone sensitivity. Now, by default, these cameras are set to record video with automatic sensitivity. And that's good for just like general shooting. But if you're getting serious about it, automatic microphone sensitivity will listen for any quiet areas and then crank the volume up. So like when I'm talking, it'll sound fine. But then if I'm silent for a second, the background hum will go up. It'll be like, and then as soon as I start talking, it'll adjust the sensitivity back down. Basically what it means is you don't ever want to use the auto microphone sensitivity if you care about what the sound is like. So I've got it in video mode here. I'm going to going to the menu system, selecting the camera, and I'm going down to page 3, and I'm selecting microphone sensitivity. And now you can see my levels here. I'm going to set it to manual instead, and then just dial this up and down until I usually like it to be where I'm just occasionally getting into the yellow, but never ever clipping. So now that that's set, I'll set it to OK. Now, I can monitor those levels here on the video screen, and if I want to see different information, I can hit the Disp button, but here you can see them over here. That way you can make sure that your levels aren't peaking. Like if we clap here, you can see it jumped into the red. I also want to warn you about electronic VR. I talked about vibration reduction earlier and still shooting scenarios where you might want to turn it on and off. So go back through the table of contents to find that part. You should almost always turn it off when you're shooting video because it will create weird wobbles from time to time. It doesn't happen that often. You can shoot a lot and maybe even never notice it. I know some people didn't see it because they weren't looking closely, but for us and the way we shoot, we're kind of nitpicky about it. We had some shots ruined because the vibration reduction gave it like a weird shake. So that is physical vibration reduction where the sensor is moving, and it's exactly like in still photography. So just jump back to that. But there's also electronic VR, which is just for shooting video. When you turn on electronic VR, the sensor crops the image down a little bit and then will track it electronically to reduce the stabilization some. I've also heard bad things about this. I have not spent any time with it because people just said that it gets really weird and kind of icky looking. So I just never used it. But if you do want to try it out, go into menu here, go to movie, and then on page 3, you can see electronic VR. And you can turn it on. This effectively is the same as applying stabilization in post-processing in your favorite video editor, except it's built into the camera. So it saves you a step of stabilization, except like I said, it gets a little weird. Some more warnings about shooting video. We tried vlogging with this camera where we shot with a shallow depth of field and stood in front of it, and it would find our face and track it. And it did a better job than any Nikon camera we had ever tested. Like it's worlds beyond a D750 or D850, but it can still miss focus a lot. Whenever possible, use single AF and when you're filming still subjects. If you are tracking moving subjects, know that it won't track them perfectly. It can move in and out a little bit and it can look a little weird. One way to make that less weird is to use a higher f-stop number so you have some additional depth of field. Just trying to help you get the most out of it so you don't have any shots that you look back on and we're like, oh man, I wish I could have done this a little bit better. And again, I would avoid using the VR and the electronic VR unless you really, really need them. I'm going to show you how to do time lapses and intervals, which you basically allow you to either take a lot of pictures over a long period of time and then stitch them into a nice time lapse or record a time lapse video directly into the camera. So if you want to record a time-lapse video without having to stitch it later, so go into the menus, go into the camera icon here. Let's go to page 4, and here we can see time-lapse movie. Here I can adjust the interval for how long it takes between shots, how long it's going to shoot for, that's the shooting time, the exposure smoothing, which I usually prefer to leave it on so things don't get all blinky. And then I can choose whether or not I want it to be silent or not. Silent photography for time-lapse stuff is usually okay. And if you're gonna like record the sunrise from your hotel room and you wanna start it before sunrise, but you don't want the clanking of the shutter to wake you up, silent photography is a really good option. Now I can scroll down here, the image area between FX and DX, the frame size and frame rate. You can see I can set this to 4K. And interval priority. What interval priority means is if I've set it to take a picture every 5 seconds and auto exposure requires it to have a 10-second shutter, it will shut off the shutter after 5 seconds in order to take the next picture. So in other words, longer exposures will not stop it from hitting that interval that you've specified when you set interval priority to on. When you're ready, you can just click start and it will shoot. And if you want to interrupt it, you can turn the camera off or press OK. That will create a video file for you, but not record the individual files. So if you're vlogging and you want to drop it right into the video, do that. If you want to make a high quality, higher resolution time lapse, select time lapse movie, the next option down here. I'll select OK, and everything will pretty much look exactly the same, except again, it's taking stills according to whatever your settings are, JPEG, RAW, whatever. Now let's get into the Wi-Fi tool, which is SnapBridge. Now, this allows you to do some remote control over your camera as well as to transfer files from your camera to your phone. And as we get into the App Store here, now that it's installed, I'll open it up. SnapBridge will introduce you to the process with a little tutorial. You can skip it if you want. Make sure that you have Bluetooth turned on your camera because it can use both Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. So the first step here is to connect to camera, and it kind of walks us through that. We have a mirrorless camera, so we're going to select that. Now, we'll want to pair it with Bluetooth and then use a Wi-Fi connection when possible because Bluetooth is a little bit slow. As you can see, when you select Bluetooth, the icons here show both Bluetooth and Wi-Fi, whereas Wi-Fi is just Wi-Fi. So pairing with Bluetooth is the better thing. As I selected that, it's now searching for my camera, and it's showing me exactly what I need to do. So let's do what they say. Let's go into the menu here, go down to the wrench icon, and then on the 4th page of the setup menu, you'll see connect to smart device. So I'll select that, and then pairing Bluetooth, start pairing. All right, and it found it. Now I need to select that on my smartphone. It's connecting to the camera. Now it says it wants me to press the camera OK button. You don't need to allow access to your contacts and call history, and I'll click pair. Now they're paired, and they should be able to connect automatically in the future. Auto link can be useful. Auto link will allow it to update the camera with location information and to set the camera's clock. So I like auto link, though I would avoid the auto download, especially if you have the Nikon Z7 because the files are so high megapixel. Instead, I always prefer to manually transfer the images I want. I do not find the auto download feature to be usable in the way it's currently implemented. Now I'll press done. It's giving you some warnings. Okay, pairing complete. First, let's get some pictures from the camera over to my phone so that I could share them on Instagram, for example. My smartphone is now connecting to the camera's Wi-Fi. There we go. Now we can see this wonderful photography that I took in the tutorial. I can just pick a picture. Definitely want to share this on Instagram. Click download. Now I can choose between a smaller 2 megapixel file or the original size file. 2 megapixels, honestly, even on Instagram, when I do that, people are like, why is it so blurry? So like I would never transfer the 2 megapixel file. I would always do the original file. Like your smartphone is usually like 8 or 12 megapixels. And now, you know, if I were to go into Instagram and add it, like you can see, there's my picture. I'm sure that's going to be a huge hit. Let's get back into the SnapBridge app. That worked well. Let's select remote photography here. Again, it wants to connect to the Wi-Fi to do this, so it's going to have to go back through the connection process. What you'll notice is when I went from selecting pictures and then jumped out of it, it then dropped the Wi-Fi connection, which means it now needs to reconnect it again. So you want to do everything all at once. Like don't select one picture and then share it and then go back and transfer another picture. Transfer all the pictures you might want to share to your phone at one time and then drop the connection. The camera says connected to remote device, and now you can see a live view of everything going on. So if I spin the camera back around, let's hit AF on. There you can see my cameraman, Justin, working hard behind the scenes. Pretty cool, right? You get like a live feed through this. I can take pictures with the shutter button here. I can, you know, adjust settings like the aperture and the exposure compensation. And if I flip it horizontal, it works that way too. So now you have remote control over the camera. Cool, right? You can even go in and hit the little gear icon here and set a self timer in case you wanted to like do a self portrait. You could compose it, set this up, hide your camera from view, and have it take the picture in just a couple of seconds. Every time you take a picture, it's automatically transferring it to your phone, but it's it's doing a 2 megapixel version. So if you hit the gear icon, you can go in here and do the original size. And that just means it's going to take a little bit longer. But it's really nice because when you do remote shooting, the pictures are automatically there. So immediately you'll be able to share them on Instagram. And that mostly is how I would use the app. There is the option here of browsing your pictures directly from the app, but why would you do that, right? You'll probably end up doing it from Instagram, and this Nikon image space is like, they want to like have you pay them to store their files. There's no reason to use that. I wouldn't do that. This Wi-Fi and Bluetooth connection will eat your batteries. It will go through your batteries on your smartphone and your camera. It's a pain. That's why I suggest not turning on that automatic transfer. And anytime you're not using SnapBridge, this is a recommendation directly from the people at Nikon to turn on airplane mode. You should be in airplane mode almost all the time. Hit the menu button, go to the wrench icon, and then we're on like page 4 at the top. You'll see airplane mode there. Enable airplane mode. You don't have to be in airplanes. If you want to connect via Wi-Fi, the first thing you'll do is go on and turn airplane mode off. You might put that onto the I menu if you're using it frequently. Now I'll show you how to customize the controls. Turn the camera on, go to the menus, hit the pencil icon here, and then controls, and then F2 here, custom control assignment. Using the directional pad, you can browse through all the different buttons and it's showing them to you. So select it and then choose whatever function you want to assign to the button. You can't choose every function available, but there are quite a few. You'll notice this option here, the AE/AF lock. Some lenses have a button on them that is programming that button. This lens, your kit lens, probably doesn't have that button. I also want to show you the My Menu feature. Because these menus are so complex, you might want to make your own little custom menu. And if we scroll down to the bottom here, the very last one here, you'll see My Menu. I can select Add Items and then go back in and browse through. I frequently format memory cards, so that's something I would use. And now you can see when I go down to My Menu, it's going to have just the menu items that I've added. Whew, there is another option here. If you don't want to set up your own custom menu items and you want the camera to kind of figure out the stuff you have used most recently, select Choose Tab and then change this to Recent Settings. And now it's going to start recording stuff. But let's say I go in and I turn airplane mode off and then back on. If I go back down to Recent Settings, now you can see airplane mode will appear here. So once you turn it on, it will start to watch what you're doing and record them. So if you're not manually setting up My Menu, set it to Recent Settings because it's probably the stuff that you need most of the time anyway. I mentioned earlier, the mode dial has 3 very useful settings here, U1, U2, and U3. You can use this to dial in the perfect settings for a situation. Like I shoot my kids' soccer game all the time. When I'm indoors, low light, I'll usually be shooting her at 1/500th of a second in shutter priority with auto ISO and like a specific white balance for the indoor arena. And going through and getting all those settings right every time would be a pain. So here's what I would do. I would, for that scenario, I would set the camera to shutter priority. I would dial in a shutter speed of 500ths of a second and do whatever else I want for that particular shooting scenario. Now I'm going to go into the menu system, go to the wrench icon, and go to Save User Settings. Save User Settings, the second option here. Now you can see I have the option to save it to U1, U2, or U3. So I'll save it to U1. Save Settings, and go back. Okay, so now it's a different thing. I'm shooting portraits and whatever. I switch it to 1/60th of a second and switch it back to Aperture Priority and everything's all screwed up. All I have to do is take the mode dial and switch it over to U1. And now look, 1/500th of a second, auto ISO, just like I set it up for sports. Use this. Pick your 3 most common shooting scenarios so you can jump back to them at any point. And can I just suggest setting U1 to be your default, I can shoot anything kind of settings? Because I think if you want to capture an immediate moment, when that amazing moment arises in front of you and something crazy happens with beautiful light and birds are flying through the sky and you don't have time to think about the settings and you just want to shoot and grab, set those settings to U1 and keep your camera in U1 all the time. That way you don't screw up your other settings, but your camera is ready to shoot some random event. So maybe it's like auto ISO and 1/500th of a second in shutter priority. Those are pretty good settings for just like capturing any random thing that might appear before you. That wraps up our tutorial. Thank you for watching it. I hope it has been helpful. If you have other tips for using the Z6 or Z7, please add a comment down below. And if you're watching this, maybe read the comments and pick up tips from other users that they picked up in the real world. If this has helped you, you might consider supporting us by checking out our video book, Stunning Digital Photography, the #1 photography book in the world. It's not just a book. It also has over 14 hours of video in it. And if you aren't happy with it, I'll just give you your money back. But like, it's $10, so it's not that bad, right? Go to Amazon, search for my name, Tony Northup, and you can check out the reviews on my books. Also head to sdp.io/store because you can buy stuff directly from us. We also have a professional portrait training series now for people who want to be serious about the business. Like, it mostly teaches the business of photography, how to save money and how to make money so that you can make a living doing what you love. Don't forget to subscribe for a ton more free videos. Give us a like and share sdp.io/tutorial with your friends so they can figure out how to use their new camera. Thanks.